All right, everyone, we might make a start. So hello and good morning. My name is Apu and I'm the Injury Prevention Officer here at Injury Matters. And I'm so excited to be facilitating this webinar today, which will look at injury prevention among people with a disability. Oops, there you go. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today and taking the time out of your busy schedules to build your knowledge and awareness around how to make environments safer for people with disability. Today, I'm facilitating this webinar from Whadjuk Noongar land. So I would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I am facilitating this webinar today. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the leaders emerging. Australia always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I would love to know where you all are tuning in from, so please do use the chat box to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land you're tuning in from today. Before we start, I want to go over a few housekeeping points. So can everyone check and please, just mute yourselves if your microphones are on. This will allow everyone to hear the presenters clearly when you are muted. We'd also love to hear your questions, so we strongly encourage you to please send them through to the Q&A box below, and we will go through them at the end of the presentation. If you have more than one person in the room with you listening to today's webinar, we would appreciate it if you could please send us a quick private message via the chat tab to let us know how many people are listening in with you. Also, if you face any technical issues during the presentations, please write them in the chat box and we will do our best to help you. I have Joe helping me here today. And also this webinar is recorded. A quick overview of what we're going to cover in today's webinar. We're going to look at the risk factors causing injuries among people with a disability. We're also going to be exploring some prevention and management strategies to injury when working with people with disability. And also we'll be touching on some relevant resources and interventions health professionals can use when working with people with disability. We'll be joined by Carli du Plessis from APM, as well as Jody Nikolic from PBF Australia on today's webinar. Our previous presenter, Simon Still, who was meant to be one of our speakers today, unfortunately could not present today, so Jody is taking over from him. So a bit about Injury Matters. We are for safer people and places. Injury Matters aims to prevent and reduce the impact of injury within the Western Australian community. We do this through advocating and providing education for injury prevention, as well as providing support for people who have impacted by injury. Today's webinar is delivered by our No Injury program with the with the support of the WA Department of Health. No Injury is a statewide program which aims to enhance the capacity of injury prevention and safety promotion practitioners to deliver quality injury prevention activities. Via the No Injury program, we provide training events, resources, and networking opportunities to support injury prevention across the sector. Given the diversity of injury in WA, the program involves a variety of injury topics. However, today we're going to focus on the topic of injury prevention among people with a disability. It was the International Day of People with Disability on Friday. The International Day of People with Disability is a United Nations observed day celebrated on the 3rd of December every year to increase public awareness, understanding, and acceptance of people with disability. It's an opportunity for our community to make positive changes to the lives of 4.4 million Australians with disability. We all have a role to play in ensuring people with disability have the opportunity to reach their full potential and participate in all aspects of community life. I want to urge everyone to take action this December and all year round to make our society more inclusive. There is a risk of injury in almost every aspect of human activity, but when working with people with impairments, disabilities, or even have people who have special healthcare needs, this risk is increased due to various reasons. Wheelchairs and walking aids can increase the risk of injury and falls. Cognitive impairments are also a well-known risk of injury. People with epilepsy have a greater risk of drowning and burns than those without epilepsy, and people with a sensory deficit are at a greater risk of pedestrian injury. So considering these factors, restricting activities of people with disability is not conducive. So how can we minimize the risk of injury and ensure environments are safer and accessible for people with disability? To explore more about this and add her occupational therapist perspective to this topic, and she's also bringing a wealth of experience working with people with disability, I'd like to welcome our first speaker for today, Carli du Plessis. She is an occupational therapist based in Canberra, Australia. APM focus on enhancing an individual's employability, health, and well-being, as well as social and economic participation in their community. For people with injury, illness, or disability, as well as children and the elderly, the employed, and those facing hardship or harm, the APM team make a positive and lasting social impact through the services they provide every day. They empower people to remain independent, healthier, and encourage increased social participation. So please welcome Carli. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you, Apu. Hello, everyone. I'll just quickly set up my screen over here. Everyone can see that? Good. Alrighty, welcome. Today, as Apu said, we are going to look a little bit at injury prevention among people with a disability.
Sorry, Carli, we can see your notes.
Oh, can you? Oh, there you go.
It's your presenter view for some reason. Just try again.
No problem. I will quickly restart it. Do you see the screen now?
Not yet.
No?
No.
Oh, apologies for that.
That's all right. It kind of glitches sometimes. It's fine.
I'll go this way and then I'll start it.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yes, that's good.
Perfect. All good. All right. So just a little bit about myself. So my name is Carli. I am an occupational therapist trained actually back in South Africa, where I did quite a bit of clinical occupational therapy work in an acute mental health hospital and also physical rehab hospital for a few years before moving to Australia. So I mainly worked with spinal patients just after they became paraplegics or quadriplegics, and we did kind of the acute rehab phase before they were discharged into the community. So relating to this today, obviously did quite a bit of education in terms of conditions, carer training, things like that, and have seen quite a few ways in which we can actually prevent injuries for those type of people in their home environment and also in the community. So please feel free to ask questions throughout via the chat box, and I'll see what I can do in terms of answering them at the end. So just quickly on today, we obviously need to have a little bit of a look at what is a disability. So I'll go through that. I'll then also touch briefly on any risk factors for injuries, specifically amongst people with a disability. And then I'll also quickly touch on the injury prevention strategies that we could implement to try and mitigate those risks. So just quickly on what is a disability, I'm sure everyone who's dialing in today will know this answer. But according to the Government of Western Australia Department of Communities, specifically Disability Services, a disability is any continuing condition that restricts everyday activities. The Disability Services Act defines disability as meaning a disability is something that is attributable to an intellectual, psychiatric, cognitive, neurological, sensory, or physical impairment, or it can be a combination of all of these. It's also something that is permanent or likely to be permanent. It can be chronic or it can be episodic in nature. And then it also results in substantially reduced capacity of the person for communication, social interaction, learning, or mobility, and a need for continuing support services. It's important to note that with the assistance of appropriate aids and services, these restrictions that people with a disability experience can actually be minimized. And some disabilities with appropriate aids and services can actually be overcome to a certain extent. So why then are people with disabilities at a higher risk for injury? Now, everyone knows while unintentional injuries, all of us can get injured, and unintentional injuries are actually the leading cause of death for everyone between the ages of 1 and 44, so accidental. But people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are at even a higher risk. There's research that shows that people with disabilities are actually 4 times more likely to die in a fire, 6 times more likely to die from a fall, and 6 times more likely to die from drowning. This is quite significant if you think about it. It's also, and I'll go a little bit into the stats on this later, it's also been found that people with disabilities have poor overall health, reduced access to appropriate health care, and are also actually more inclined to be smokers or have physical inactivity. And all of these things will contribute to them actually having a higher risk of injury. So what exactly is a physical disability? Just to go a little bit into detail on this, we've got the musculoskeletal system, which is anything to do with movement of the body, the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments, all of those things. We've also got circulatory. This is your heart, your lungs, your arteries, your veins. We've also got the respiratory system, which would be lungs, breathing, sound production, and so forth. And we've also got the nervous system, which is basically controlling voluntary movement, memory, learning, reflexes, etc. So while there are many disabilities, today's focus will be a little bit more on the physical disability, which is actually the most common type of disability, followed closely by intellectual and sensory disabilities thereafter. So when we look at risk factors specific to people with disabilities, there's 3 important things that we need to look at. Risk factors is something that increases a person's chance of injury. And there's actually 3 key focus points when we look at this. The first one is intrinsic risk factors, and that is everything to do with the actual person that we are dealing with. The next one is extrinsic, which is focused more on the environment in which they find themselves in. And then we've got behavioral, which is based on the activity the person is doing or any activity that the person might find themselves participating in. So I'll quickly go into detail with all of these risk factors. I might give you a couple seconds just with the intrinsic factors. Maybe brainstorm a bit. You're welcome to use the chat box if you want. Maybe just think about what could be an intrinsic risk factor. So if we look at it, and you're welcome to look at the screen and see if you got something that I put on there. Intrinsic risk factors are all to do with the specific person and their history and their medical condition. So it might be that someone's had previous falls, has had several fractures in the past, maybe their balance is impaired because of their specific disability, they might have restricted mobility, they might have a fear of falling, they might actually have reduced muscle strength, pain, low mood, cognitive impairment, and impaired vision. These are all things that are kind of part of the person. We can't change it. It's inherent to their condition. It's inherent to maybe their personality. It's all things that could put them at higher risk of an injury. If we then look at extrinsic, I'll do it again. I'll give you a couple of seconds just to think about something in the environment that might contribute to a person being more at risk of an injury. So these would be things like stairs and steps, any tripping hazards, maybe it's too dark in a room, or maybe it's too light. That can actually play a role as well. Glare, reflections, maybe there's a lack of appropriate adaptations. could be that there's poor heating, there's pets, movable parts, thresholds and doors, or it's just really poor accessibility. These, as you can imagine, are quite important to note, because these are things that we could likely change or at least adapt a little bit in order to make it more accessible or to reduce the risk of causing an injury. We then also have behavioral, which again is more activity based. So another couple of seconds for you to see if you can come up with a few before I show them. So we've got limited physical activity, so maybe they are not exercising at all, they've got poor nutrition, maybe they are using too much alcohol or have a drug use problem, maybe carrying or reaching a risk-taking behavior, maybe they're wearing the wrong footwear, they're wearing the wrong clothing, or there's inappropriate use or refusal even to use assistive devices. So again, these are also things that we can change, but it's sometimes not as easy to change as the extrinsic risk factors, because it's something that is kind of related to what a person likes to do, what they might be involving themselves in, ways in which they present in terms of their personality, their beliefs, things like that. So it's all behavioral related. So going back to some of the stats that I mentioned earlier, I got these from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, and it actually says that 47 of people aged 2 and over with a disability do not eat enough fruit, vegetables, compared to 41% without a disability. We've also got 18% of people aged 15 and over with a disability who smoke daily, compared to 12% without. And we've also got 72% of people aged 15 and over with a disability do not do enough physical activity, compared to 52% without. Now, why is this important? If you think about it, we want to keep people as healthy as possible, as that contributes to their risk factors of getting injured. So if someone is not eating well enough, being undernourished can actually lead to complications, comorbid conditions, maybe a lack of motivation, maybe a lack of overall health, which obviously will increase their risks of further injuries. Same with smoking. We all know that smoking can have quite negative effect on our health, and physical activity as well. The less you exercise, the less mobile you are, the less your endurance is, and the higher your risk of injury. So then the big question is, what do we do about it? How do we go about preventing those injuries and mitigating the risks? So to do that, we need to look at injury prevention. And it's important to know what is injury prevention and why is it actually important. So injury prevention is the effort that we go about to reduce or prevent bodily harm caused by external mechanisms before they actually occur. And that is the key part, is before they occur. So it's also activities to prevent, ameliorate, treat, or reduce an injury. It's the multidisciplinary science of averting damage to body tissues by identifying the host, the agent, and environmental factors that interact to create the risk of injury. Why is it important? By identifying the most common causes of an injury and the best prevention measures, we can help people stay safe. We can help and we can prevent most physical injuries, whether it's intended or accidental, if we have good strategies in place. Injury prevention strategies often involve combinations of education to improve safe behavior, better engineering of environments and products, and legal requirements to regulate both the engineering and the behavior. All strategies, however, require evaluation and re-evaluation over time. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, but I'll quickly take you through a little bit of a breakdown of what this involves. So when we look at injury prevention strategies, the key considerations that we need to look at, there's 4. The first one is the condition. So basically, what is the level of understanding of the underlying condition of a person with a disability amongst patients, their families, their primary care physicians, any other adult that might be involved with them on a daily basis. The second one is the environment. So basically, is there anything in the environment that could cause a risk? And also, is there any way we can prepare for these dangers to try and mitigate those risks? Thirdly, there I touch on it again, preparedness. Is there maybe supervision? Are we prepared? Is there other ways that we can go about ensuring that a person is less likely to get injured? And then the fourth one is education. Now, to put this a little bit into practice, I'm going to go through a bit of an example of a client with epilepsy. As Apu mentioned earlier in her introduction, people with epilepsy are actually proven to be at a higher risk of drowning. So if we look at these 4, let's say we've got a client with epilepsy who wants to go to a swimming event or maybe go swimming with their friends. What are the things that we can look at to try and minimize the risk of drowning? So if we look at the condition, so again, like I mentioned earlier, we look at the level of understanding of the underlying condition amongst the patient or the client, their family, their primary carers, anyone that is involved. So maybe it would be worth finding out, what is epilepsy? Do they know? Do they know what it entails? Do they actually know what happens when someone has a seizure? Now, if you didn't know, when someone has a seizure, and this might be why they are at an increased risk of drowning, when you have a seizure, there's actually air being expelled from your lungs. So this actually increases the density of your body. And because your body is more dense, it actually then promotes your body sinking or being submerged. So that's quite important for someone to realize that that is why they are at a higher risk. It's also important to know things like how often do they get the seizures? If they do get a seizure, how long does it usually last? Is the person maybe on medication that has specific side effects? What are those side effects? When does it happen? Like, is there something that triggers something? Is it maybe straight after taking the meds or usually an ongoing thing? So that's the type of questions that you would want your patient to understand, and also their families or anyone that takes care of them or are supervising them on a daily basis. They need to understand this. The second thing that we look at is then the environment. So if we are not prepared for the dangers of the environment, then we have a problem. So it might be, usually injuries are quite predictable and they occur to people at a high risk setting. So it would be wise, let's say someone who with epilepsy wants to go swimming, maybe don't let them go swimming somewhere where there's murky water. Something like a familiar environment might be a better option compared to a whole new environment, just so that we kind of know what to expect. I'm not saying that you shouldn't take someone with epilepsy somewhere new, but it might just be worth maybe you researching the place, maybe just be prepared for what is there, what facilities are around, maybe maybe be prepared in terms of the number to dial if something happens. The next thing we look at is preparedness. So will there be supervision when the person goes swimming? Is the person on, again, like I said, with the condition, are they on specific medications? Are the people that's around the person at that time prepared for in case something happens? And do we have the appropriate adaptive equipment? maybe like what would they need? Maybe a flotation device would be suitable for this person in this specific environment. Is there any triggers or any stresses that might pop up when we take this person swimming? And then the fourth one is actually just education, and this ties in with everything I just mentioned again. Everyone needs to be educated in terms of the condition, the environment, and how they can be prepared. It's also useful to take into consideration any other education that the client can be provided, such as maybe do they know how to swim? Like, is it worth maybe just teaching them water skills before they go swimming? So these are all kind of things that we need to look at in terms of injury prevention. So I'll quickly, to kind of make it a little bit easier going forward, when you put it into practice, I actually found this model. It's not actually related to healthcare, but more towards safety in a workplace or safety on a construction site. But I found it quite applicable to our specific field and to working with people with disabilities. And it's the 5 E's of safety. So the first one is education. So a lot of this will be a repeat of what I mentioned, but it just ties it in very well together. So a high percentage of accidents are caused by human failure. So how do we mitigate that? We need to provide training. So this can be education regarding the condition, education regarding any potential risks, maybe do caregiver training, maybe do practical demonstrations, or training to use equipment and assistive devices. So if we go back to when I worked at the rehab hospital, we would have maybe a person with paraplegia being discharged into the community. They've been with us for about 3 months. They need to go home. It's a very different situation. So we get a carer to come in and we do carer training where we go through what is a spinal cord injury, what can this person do safely, what will they struggle with, what do they need assistance with. We give them a big overview of how the wheelchair works, how to transfer the patient, things like that. So demonstrate it, have them practice, make sure they understand. The next one is engineering, and this is to do with maybe the environment, if you like, looking at exercise programs, making sure that the equipment that the person has is actually in working order. It very much ties into education. We need to make sure that the equipment that they have available, the environment that they find themselves in, is actually in working order, is safe, is accessible. They need to have the correct gear, and that the assistive devices that they use needs to be appropriate to their condition. That's very, very important, because as soon as you have someone with faulty equipment, someone who's wearing the wrong shoes, maybe they pose a slip or a fall hazard, things like that, it's all just increasing the risk. So definitely worth focusing on. The next one is enforcement. Now it sounds very forceful. But what this actually just means is that we need to make sure that people actually do what we teach them to do and actually do what they see and what they know is right. So any lessons learned in education and in engineering needs to actually be implemented. The next E is all about encouragement or enthusiasm. So we need to encourage our clients to actually do the things that we taught them with education and with engineering. Now, this can be hard to do if your client is in a negative mindset. So it's very important us as healthcare providers to have a positive attitude to make sure that our clients are in touch with well-being programs, support groups, so that they have more energy and so that they are more focused, because all of this will actually lead to a reduced risk of injury. And then the last E that we look at is evaluation. Now, as we all know, it's important to look at lessons learned throughout a process. So it's very important that throughout the whole process, we evaluate everything we did in education, in engineering, in enforcement and in encouragement, and to see what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to maybe do a bit more training on, what do we need to look at to improve the process for us. So it's a nice little package, the 5 E's of safety: education, engineering, enforcement, encouragement, and evaluation, that you can use as an injury prevention strategy. And maybe it's something nice and basic to actually teach your clients or your patients and their families, to ensure that when they go out into the world and they start integrating into the community, and you're not maybe around to teach them these things every day, it's a good way to go about kind of reinforcing the behavior. So just on some further resources, I know that Jody will go into a little bit more detail, but I found these 2 resources quite handy. They are specific to specific conditions. So the first one is actually all about preventing falls in older people, but the strategies that they go into is quite good just as a broad. So if you want to apply it to a specific condition, you might just have to tweak a little bit of the suggestions and the strategies that they go into. But I find it quite handy. It's freely available on Google. It's a PDF. You can just download it if you Google that. The second one is the International Handbook of Occupational Therapy Interventions. And again, same thing. It does go into quite a lot of detail. It's a book. You can also download it from the internet. But it's very, very handy as a resource if you wanted to do a little bit more reading on injury prevention strategies. Now, again, I know there might be some questions later, but I also have added my contact details. If anyone had any questions at a later stage, please feel free to reach out. And that would be me, Apu. I'll hand over back to you and Jody.
Thank you, Carli. That was great. So now I'm going to introduce Jody. If you have any questions, again, just like pop them in the Q&A box and we'll get to it later. I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Jody Nikolic, who is filling in for Simon Still as the Spinal Cord Injury Prevention Manager at PBF Australia. PBF Australia, or the Paraplegic Benefit Fund, is a not-for-profit national organisation dedicated to reducing the impact of and incidence of spinal cord injury. PBF delivers injury prevention programs and provides much-needed financial support for members who sustain a total permanent traumatic spinal cord injury. Please welcome Jody. Sorry, Jody, you have to unmute yourself. I'm going to try, but...
Ha, I'm
there
alive.
You go. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, my techie's here doing all that stuff for me.
That's all right.
Good morning, everybody. That was great, Carli. I really enjoyed that. As Apu mentioned, I am from PBF, the Paraplegic Benefit Fund. And then we've got the raise hand button down the bottom. Have you heard of PBF? Tap the raise hand button if you've heard of us, Paraplegic Benefit Fund. Well, I can't see any. We're a well-kept secret. Hopefully, after my 15 minutes today, you will be full bottle on PBF and the programs and what we do. As Apu mentioned, we are a national charity. We were started in 1984, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But I know you're all health professionals. Did you know, though, that every day in Australia, one person is left paralysed? One person a day in Australia. The latest stats that we have in Australia, 400 traumatic spinal cord injuries every year. And in our state, Western Australia, 53 of those people are being left as wheelchair users, paralysed, either paraplegics or quadriplegics for the rest of their lives. And knowing that is why PBF was started in 1984 by Sir George Bedbrook. Sir George was the leading spinal cord surgeon in Western Australia at the time. And he used to see people present broken. He'd put them back together via surgery. and then, you know, they'd be fixed. Basically, they'd be paralyzed, but they were ready to go home. But they'd be hanging around hospital, languishing in the wards, because they couldn't go home. They didn't have probably the funds to widen their doors or change their bathrooms, modify their bathrooms. They didn't have the funds to even pay the bills to get them, you know, keep them going. So Sir George started PBF. Let me ask you though, do you know the top causes of spinal cord injury? What do you think is the top cause of all these spinal cord injuries that are occurring in Australia? 46% of all spinal cord injuries occur in motor vehicle crashes, car crashes. Motor vehicle crashes under the stats are cars hitting cars, motorbikes, cars hitting walls and trees, cars hitting pedestrians, cyclists. It also includes dirt bikes and ATV and off-road vehicles. Second top cause of spinal cord injuries is falls. And Carli talked a little bit about falls as well there. Actually, in the Fiona Stanley spinal cord ward at the moment, it's full of people who have suffered falls and are now paralysed. In the 50 and over age group, slips, trips and falls around the house. Come the silly season in the next few months, that's probably going to change. I'm going to see a lot more motor vehicle crashes presenting in hospitals. And 9% of spinal cord injuries occur around the water in aqua injuries. Going back to Sir George and PBF, Sir George saw these people languishing after they were fixed up in hospital. They couldn't get home, so he started PBF as a membership fund originally, with the goal to reduce the impact upon people living with spinal cord injury. Our membership fund is still running today, and that's what PBF is based on. From just $55 a year, a person can become a member of PBF, and then should the worst happen and that person suffer a traumatic spinal cord injury, they will receive a member benefit payment, not an insurance, just a member benefit payment, $250,000, usually within about 4 or 5 weeks of their life-changing incident. And that's just to get them out of hospital, get them home, renovate the house, and being able to pay the bills. Since Sir George first started PBF in 1984, we have expanded. We still have the goal of reducing impact upon people with spinal cord injury. Nowadays also we run the peer support program at Fiona Stanley Spinal Cord Ward. So we have a team of paralysed people down there on the wards to be there for the newly injured. That's a pretty horrific time when you're told that you're never going to walk again. So our team have lived experience, and they're there, you know, just to be there and talk to people and get their heads wrapped around their new life of the future. And the other major reason that PBF exists is to prevent spinal cord injuries. And we do that through our injury prevention programs. So we have developed injury prevention programs in all the areas where spinal cord injuries happen. We have the workplace program. Falls and transport crashes are the top causes of injuries and things falling on people in the workplace. The road program. We speak to high school students, year 10s, 11s and 12s, the students who are about to or getting their licenses, and we tell our stories there. We have the youth program. We talk at the juvenile justice. Chris, my screen's just died. Uh-oh. Well, I'll just flip over to camera 2. Camera 2? Am I on camera 2? Can you see me? Everything's dead. I will keep talking while Chris in the background tries to work out what's happened to our cameras right here. Where was I? Oh, I'm back. And I'm on camera 2, and you probably didn't realise until right now, but you've only seen me from head up, but I also am a paraplegic, a person living with a spinal cord injury. we're talking about the road program, and the road program is where I talk mine. I'm paralysed due to a motor vehicle crash. Both are dead now. Keep going. We also have a presenter, two presenters that talk on the AQUA program, and I'm back again. Okay. So George's vision when he started PBF was to have people who have suffered trauma speak about their trauma. We all tell our stories to hopefully have an impact upon listeners. We tell about our lives before the day that everything changed, the lead up to that incident, how it occurred, the choices that were made, and the consequences of living with a spinal cord injury. And we tell our stories so that hopefully going forward, listeners value their safety and think about their safety. Think before they do. That's what we try and encourage. PBF is also an organisation that employs people with a disability. I know myself, I have 2 degrees. I'm a nutritionist and an exercise physiologist. I've worked my whole life as a sporty health professional myself. But after I became a paraplegic, I couldn't go back to what I was doing, and it took me about 7 years to find employment again. So PBF, if you look at our website, you'll see 33 presenters that we have around Australia, all people who are paralysed with a spinal cord injury, and we simply tell our stories. Like Shane. Shane is the highest living quadriplegic in the world. Higher than Superman, if you remember Christopher Reeves. Shane it was the week of his 21st birthday, and he was partying hard all that weekend, celebrating his 21st birthday. When Shane tells his story, he was a risk taker. Took little risks, and that cycle of risk reward, he kept taking bigger risks and getting away with it and taking bigger risks until the day that he didn't get away with it. And basically he was drunk, riding a dirt bike, distracted, a low hanging branch ripped his basically skull off his C1. So now the consequences of that is that Shane can basically only move his mouth and his eyes. Shane does not talk. He had to make the choice between eating or talking. And when Shane tells his story via a voice-activated, machine, Shane loved chicken wings so much that he chose to eat and not talk. Now, me, myself, if I had to make that decision, I'd have to talk. I couldn't get away, rather not eat. Another one of our presenters that PBF employs is Ben. Ben became a quadriplegic in 2006, and he tells his story in the Juvenile Justice Program. And just in about 2 weeks, we have 6 sessions. 3 of our presenters will be talking to the people, the young students in detention at the Juvenile Justice, about risk-taking. Another program that both Shane and Ben talk on is the Party program. Not sure if you've heard of it. It's based out of Fiona Stanley Hospital, Royal Perth Hospital, and we're starting to go online to Bunbury and 2 other regional areas pretty soon. The Party program stands for Prevent Alcohol Risk-Related Trauma in Youth. All of our presenters, we try to match to the stories that they tell. Schools, workplaces, hospitals, the Juvenile Justice Department have been booking our presenters year after year as our model, as envisaged by Sir George, really does have an impact upon listeners. And I think our programs may fit well within some of your organisation's health and safety programs that you may run. So please consider, have a look at our website, have a look at the programs, have a look at our 33 presenters. And if your organisation are running any community safety and wellness days, consider giving employment to people with a disability as well, and booking some presenters. Also in your networks, if you know of any people living with a spinal cord injury, talk to them about PBF, get them to have a look at a website, ask them maybe if that's something that they could see themselves doing. We would love to be introduced to any people living with spinal cord injury that you may know. We can train them, upskill them, and give them meaningful employment again, which is so important, to have something really purposeful to wake up and get up to do every day. Apu, how am I with time?
Yeah, you're going great.
Yep, another 5 minutes?
Yeah, you can go 5 minutes.
Yep, sorry, I haven't got my timer on here. I'll just tell you my story, just to give you a quick idea of what our presenters do. Normally in a talk, we do some spinal cord injury stats, but then we have a good 20 to 30 minutes to, really tell our story to the listeners. A quick 4-minute version of mine. I guess most of our presenters were risk takers in the past. It's human nature to think that we're invincible. Bad things don't happen to me, bad things happen to somebody else. Isn't that human nature? And I thought that too. And I was never really a big risk taker. Never been a big drinker, never taken drugs, I was a sporty person from a young age, and a dancer from a young age, a tennis player. I wanted to go to WAPA after school, WA Performing Arts Academy, to study performance dance, but my mother didn't like that idea. So luckily I had good grades. And when I finished high school, I went to Curtin University and studied for a nutrition degree. But being sporty while I was studying at nutrition, I went, so I'm a little bit older probably. This was the 1980s. So I went and did an aerobics instructor's course and a gym instructor's course back then. And that paid the bills while I was going through uni. When I graduated from Curtin, I was working in a big chain of gyms back then, and I loved it. I loved it so much that I wanted to be a sports nutritionist. So I went back to ECU and studied sports science. Life went on, living my life. I got into triathlon in my mid-20s, loving that. At the age of 30, I had the opportunity to move overseas to study and work. So I moved to the USA. I lived in the US for 4 years, and I was studying there, working there, and training there. Here's actually a photo of me. I kept up at my triathlon, so I'm about 31 years of age there. You can see I'm running on the right-hand side of the road doing some sort of triathlon in Houston, Texas, is where I was living. After 4 years in the US, I wanted to move closer back home, but not quite ready to move back to Australia. So I was offered a really good position as a consultant nutritionist at a hospital in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. So I moved there and started that job. Within a couple of years of living in Malaysia, off of the hospital, I also set up my own little exercise facility. So it was a specific exercise and nutrition facility with 4 people with contraindications to exercise. My life was fantastic. And even though probably in those photos there, I'm in my early 40s, I still had hopes and goals and dreams. I was an avid scuba diver. That is a photo that was taken 3 months before the day that everything changed forever. And I'm 44 in that photo, so pretty fit. You can see a reef in the background, and my son, who was 13 at the time, had just done his little diving course. So he took that photo, and I've got a couple of photos of him. And that's the last photo I have of me standing with legs that work. Everything changed in an instant on November 30, 2011. So just last week, it was my 10-year crap-anniversary. Don't use anniversary, I call it the crap-anniversary, the day that everything, changed forever. It was a Wednesday, I remember it clearly, and it was just a normal Wednesday, same as everything. I was training for a series of triathlons that were coming up pretty soon. Alarm used to go off for me at 4:30 every morning. So I jumped up, had a coffee, put my training clothes on, jumped on my bike and pedaled down to the nearest McDonald's. That was our meeting spot every morning to go off and train. That morning, you know, there was some mornings there'd be 2 of us, some mornings 15 to 20 of us would turn up to go train. That morning there were 4 guys and me. It's like, oh, I've got to keep up with the boys. Anyway, long story short, I haven't got much time. The cycle went well. We went out, we came back, we were almost home. Literally probably 50, 70 meters ahead. Chris changing cameras again. 50, 70 meters ahead to the turn off left into the area where we all lived. I'd just come up the hill. I was on the flat, cooling down, and I heard my name called from behind. And I knew it was my coach, John, 2 bikes back. And probably the next 5 seconds in real life, in my memory now, is a 5-minute slow-mo video. John called my name and I was literally flying through the air, attached to my bike. My feet were still cleated into the pedals. My legs were turning. I remember thinking, wee, because my brain hadn't had a chance to catch up yet and think, Jody, you're in big trouble. And the bike started coming down and I could see the ground coming towards me. And I remember thinking, this is going to hurt. Hit the ground, bounced along a bit, banged my head, and I was knocked out. And in hindsight, I was only knocked out for a few minutes. But when I came to, there was still no traffic on the road. It was still dark. The traffic in Malaysia does not get going till quite later. I just remember breathing when I woke up. I was laying on my side, and every time I took a breath, there was like a crack. And a couple of the guys were kneeling next to me. And I remember saying, I'm not going to be coming running tomorrow. I think I've broken a rib. I wish. And the guy said, it's okay, Jody, let's try and get you up. So I started to use my arms to try and sit myself up. And that's when I immediately knew that my back was broken. There was this unearthly feeling of inside. And I just realized I couldn't move. I couldn't feel anything from there down. And I remember screaming out, don't move me, I've broken my back. Although I'd already moved myself. And I remember screaming, I'm never going to run again. Like that was the biggest thing in my life that I thought I would miss. Long story short, a week in intensive care, 3 months in hospital, finally went home, March 2nd, 2012. Just before I left hospital, the doctors told me, Jody, you're never going to move your legs again. You're never going to walk again. I actually told the doctors, nah, you don't know me. I'm an athlete. I really believed that if I researched neuroplasticity, I was reading up on everything. If I tried hard enough and went to my physio, I believed I would walk again. So much so that I refused to buy a wheelchair. I actually hired this big bunky armchair on wheels that when I went back to my little apartment on March 2nd, I didn't fit through the front door. I had to be carried in and out. I went home with a stranger. I had to hire a caregiver to live with me 24 hours a day, turn me every 2 hours in bed, help me. It took me a long time to be able to learn to transfer from bed to chair and chair to bed. Myra did everything for me. Bowel, bladder. It was humiliating. And even though I had my head wrapped around physical recovery, I'd never really thought about the mental and the emotional side. And that's when it hit me. I just, went downhill probably in the 6 months after that, I really did not have any hope. I didn't want to be here anymore. Anyway, time heals all. I stayed in Malaysia for another 5 years. I came back to Perth in 2017 and magically found PBF. And they have given me something meaningful to get up and do again, tell my story, talk to students in high schools, and hopefully by telling my longer version with more consequences, maybe, just maybe, they'll remember me one day when they're in a situation where they have to make that choice and be courageous to stand up against a driver and get themselves out of the car, to talk to people who are distracted while they're driving and say, no, focus on the road. Hopefully myself and all of us, by telling our stories, hopefully we think that we might be able to change lives. Please do consider us as a resource going forward. Have a look at our website. It's Paraplegic Benefit Fund. If you Google us, and thank you for listening, and thank you, Up.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you for sharing your story. That was really heartfelt, and we all shed a bit of a tear in here in the office. If you have any questions for either of the speakers, please do put it in the Q&A box. We do have just one. I'm gonna just share my screen. Okay, so we have one for Carli. So Carli, what are the key barriers you experience day to day when engaging people with a disability in injury prevention practices, and how do you overcome these? Oh, Carli, you're on mute, by the way.
Yeah, I was just saying, let me unmute myself. All good. That's a good question. Thank you for that. Key barriers. I would almost say the key barriers that I have found is just someone's motivation. A lot of people, I think, being in a situation where you might have a disability, sometimes everyone that kind of deals with you, they have high expectations, I think. We have high expectations from an allied health perspective, that our clients should do certain things because we know it works and the family knows that it works, so they keep telling the client that. So we've got that whole cycle of, yeah, everyone tells me what to do, but I just want to go on with my life. I just want to be me, and I just want to just leave me alone and be me. So I think that is the biggest concern that we have mostly, is just a person's motivation. It's just another thing that we expect of them. And I think the key thing to change that is to just be transparent with the person. It's worthy to know their personality and how they like to be taught something. Some people like the whole evidence-based approach. Jody was just telling us how she went to research on neuroplasticity and things like that. If that's the kind of client that you are dealing with, then go and look for the evidence. Go and look for why is it important to do certain things to prevent injuries, and use that and have a discussion with them about that. If it's someone who thrives on affirmation and encouragement, then maybe it's worth, we all know that anything that someone that you love and that you know tell you, you will take that to a higher regard than someone you don't know. So it's important to involve families or loved ones in those discussions. Make sure they know why it's important to have these injury prevention strategies, and have them encourage the client, because they will listen to them. They love them, they understand them, they know that they care for them. They sometimes will listen to their families more than they would listen to this random OT or physio who's helping them at this time. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that is what I would do.
Yeah, those are great strategies. Thank you. We don't have any other questions, so I'm just gonna move on to closing the webinar. Thank you, Carli and Jody, for your amazing talks. It was really beneficial to kind of get different sides to it. Oh, we do have one more. So for Jody, do you have any examples of your PBF lived or peer experience and design and systemic changes that have been implemented?
Sorry, I need to read it. Oh, is it down there? No. Sorry.
It's in the Q&A box, but I can read it again. Do you have any examples of your PBF lived peer experience and design and systemic changes that have been implemented?
Design and systemic changes within PBF or myself? I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Might ask to clarify, but I think through PBF, are there any kind of systemic issues that you guys have implemented as an organization? Like, have you...
Systemic issues with working with people with spinal cord injury. Most of our presenters, well, I don't know if this answers the question, but most of our presenters are paraplegics. We have probably 4 quadriplegics to travel to workplaces and schools, and often presentations are wanting to be booked in, early times, 8:30, 9:30 in the morning. That's really difficult for a quadriplegic to be up that early. They need a lot of support to get out of bed and to travel. So we had to design the programs around that. Knowing that we now have all this equipment in the office that we're still tinkering with it. We're in our pilot program phase of trying to take a lot of our programs online to be able to get to rural areas, but also to be able to give our presenters that can't travel easily the opportunity to be able to tell their stories and make a difference via the online platform. Not sure that's some systemic things that we're doing at the moment. I'm not quite sure that answers.
So Kit Scott did clarify. So she said, like universal design in homes or workplaces to accommodate people in wheelchairs, public transport, and design improvements. So like has PBF kind of...
That's not our area.
No, okay, yeah.
No. We just do injury prevention programs, our memberships, and the peer support program that is at Fiona Stanley. All of our presenters have, obviously face these environmental barriers wherever we go, but that's not something that PBF actually does.
Okay, thank you for that. So I am looking at the time, so I'm just going to wrap up. So thank you both of you for your time. We do have some upcoming training and events. So at Injury Matters, we have a number of trainings for health professionals that we do. So we have an upcoming medication and falls in older adults workshop that is going to be on the 27th of January, which is a 2-hour workshop in Perth, WA. We also have a webinar on the 16th of February looking at ways we can advocate for a safer WA by addressing the urban design strategies to make our environment safer and healthier place for everyone. So if you're interested in any of these upcoming trainings that you see on the screen, please check out our website and register your interest using the events tab on our website. We also have an injury prevention network. So the Injury Prevention Network meets quarterly to provide professionals such as yourselves working in the injury prevention space across WA with an opportunity to connect with each other to share learnings and solutions in injury prevention and safety promotion. So if you want to sign up to be a part of the network, let me know or send me an email using the email address shown on the screen. We'd also love to hear your feedback about what you thought about today's workshop training. So we'll be having an evaluation survey pop up after this webinar ends. We would appreciate it if you could complete the survey so we know what you thought about today's webinar. We really value your feedback and it helps us to ensure we're delivering trainings that meet your needs. We also have Connected. Connected is an online networking program for professionals working in the injury prevention space. It is a networking program where participants are randomly paired bi-monthly to have a 15-minute conversation with another professional working in the injury prevention space. It takes a hassle out of networking and provides you with the opportunity to connect and share your knowledge and skills with the injury prevention sector. It's easy to sign up, just hover your phone over the QR code or go to our website using the link below there. But yeah, that's it for today. Thank you everyone for joining me, and thank you Carli and Jody. It was lovely to hear everything about what you had to share. Yeah, so I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Apu.